Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 5 deeply unsettling accounts from people who stopped at closed gas stations along remote stretches of road and found something waiting for them that had nothing to do with getting fuel. These are stories of wrong turns, strange lights, and things that shouldn't have been standing in the dark between the pumps. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button before we get started, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into it. Story 1. There's a stretch of highway out in the high desert of eastern New Mexico. I think it's off Route 54, maybe a little north of Carrizozo, where the land goes so flat and so empty that the sky feels like it's pressing down on you. I'm talking about the kind of flat where you can watch a thunderstorm happening 30 miles away and it looks close enough to touch. I'd driven through it plenty of times on my way to visit my aunt in Alamogordo, and I always got a little uneasy around that stretch, though I never had a good reason for it, just one of those roads. I was 29 when this happened, or maybe 30. I just had a birthday, and I'm bad at remembering which one it was. I was making the drive alone, coming down from Albuquerque after a job interview that hadn't gone especially well. It was late October. I remember that clearly, because the air had that particular dry bite it gets out there in autumn. My name is Cowan Mitchell, and I want to say up front that I know how this is going to sound. I'd stopped in Socorro to get gas and a coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since the previous Tuesday. The clerk had one of those old paper road atlases behind the counter, the kind with the laminated cover, and there was a red pen circle around something near Carrizozo that I noticed but didn't ask about. I don't know why I remember that detail. I just do. I had a road mix going, some old folk stuff, Gillian Welch I think, and my heater was making a rattling noise that I'd been meaning to get looked at for 3 weeks. The kind of thing you start ignoring because it doesn't get worse, it just keeps being annoying. I had half a bag of gas station pretzels on the passenger seat and a water bottle that had been rolling under my seat the whole trip. Ordinary, normal. Around 11 at night, the low fuel light came on. I hadn't been paying attention. The needle had been creeping toward empty for longer than I'd realized, and I did that thing where you start doing math in your head. How many miles, how many gallons can I make it? And the math wasn't great. I started watching for lights. The first place I found was about 4 miles up, a gas station and convenience store where it had been once. There was a sign, one of those tall pole signs with the brand name and price panels, but the panels were blank and the light behind the sign was off. The canopy over the pumps was still standing, and I can tell you the pumps themselves were still there, 4 of them, 2 on each island. But the windows of the store were dark and there was a chain across the entrance to the lot. A handwritten sign on the chain said closed, not closed for the season or closed for renovation, just closed. I pulled into the gravel shoulder and sat there with my engine running, checking my phone. No service. I figured I'd try to coast to the next town, and I was just reaching for the gear shift when I saw someone standing at the far pump. I told myself it was a person waiting for service, which didn't make sense even as I thought it because the station was clearly closed. I told myself it was a shadow from my headlights, which also didn't really hold up because my lights were aimed at the chain and the sign, not back at the pumps. But I sat there making these explanations to myself for a good 30 seconds before I accepted that I was looking at a person standing at the last pump island, facing away from me. They were tall, taller than seemed right for the space. The pump housing usually comes up to about chest height on most people, and this figure's head was level with the top of the canopy support beam, and they were standing completely still. I sat there a while longer than I probably should have. I think some part of me was waiting to see what they'd do, like if they turned around and waved, I'd know it was fine. They didn't turn around, they didn't move at all, and then they did, and I wish they hadn't. The movement wasn't a turn, it was more like a fold. like the upper half of the body hinged forward at the waist and kept going, past 90 degrees, past horizontal, the torso dropping down and down until the face was pointing straight at the ground, and then the whole thing slowly straightened back up. And then it did it again. I don't know what that was. I started to tell myself it was some kind of exercise, a person doing stretches, and I couldn't finish that sentence even in my own head because no stretch looks like that. The spine doesn't bend that way. Nothing bends that way. I put the car in gear. My hands were shaking. I pulled back onto the road and I drove, I don't know how fast. The music was still playing and I didn't turn it off. I couldn't look away from the road ahead of me, but I also couldn't stop myself from glancing in the rearview mirror, and every time I did, I saw the station receding in the dark, the canopy, the chain. The third time I checked the mirror, the tall figure was standing at the edge of the road behind me, not at the pump island, at the road. I drove 40 miles on fumes before I hit a truck stop, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could go in and pay. The attendant asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. The next morning, when I was packing up at the motel in Alamogordo, I found a hand imprint on my back passenger window. On the outside, not a smear, a full press, fingers spread wide, palm flat. The fingers were too long. I counted them. There were 6. I've driven that highway maybe twice since then, always in daylight, always with a full tank. I still watch the poles of the pump islands when I pass that stretch. I haven't stopped. Story 2. My grandmother left me her house when she died, which sounds like a gift until you understand the house. It sat at the end of a gravel road outside a small town in the Oklahoma Panhandle, the part of the state that looks like someone forgot to finish drawing it on a map, and it had been empty for about 2 years by the time the estate got sorted out. The roof was fine. The plumbing needed work. I kept saying I'd go out and assess things, sell it or fix it, but I kept putting it off the way you put off things that carry a lot of feeling. I finally went out the summer I was 34. My friend Paige offered to come with me, which I was grateful for, though I tried not to show it. She was the kind of person who found old farmhouses charming in a way I'd stopped being able to. She brought a cooler with sandwiches and sparkling water, and a playlist she called Road Trip Gothic, which she was very pleased with. The drive through the Panhandle is long and honest. There's nowhere to pretend the emptiness isn't there. The grass is short and brown and the sky is enormous. We stopped for gas at a place outside Boise City that looked like it was held together by old habit and one stubborn pump. Paige got a bag of peanuts and a postcard with a picture of a prairie dog on it. The guy behind the counter had a dog named Earl who was asleep under the register. I remember all of this very clearly because I've thought about the contrast a lot since then, how easy everything felt right up until it didn't. We got to the house late afternoon. It was smaller than I remembered from childhood, or maybe I was just bigger. The inside smelled like dust and old upholstery, and a little bit like my grandmother's hand lotion, which made me feel strange. Paige went room to room with her phone light like she was conducting an inspection. I went through the kitchen drawers finding things I didn't know what to do with: rubber bands, a partial deck of cards, a small key that didn't seem to open anything. We'd planned to spend the night. We had sleeping bags. Paige had found 2 intact rooms that she declared habitable, and we'd propped the windows open to let some air through. The sky outside went pink and then orange and then a deep purple before it went dark. Around 10 o'clock, I needed to move my car, which I'd parked at an angle that was blocking part of the gravel turnaround. I stepped outside, and that's when I noticed the light. Down the road, maybe a quarter mile, there was a gas station. I knew it had been there. It had closed sometime in the late 90s, I thought, an old mom-and-pop place my grandmother had used. But the windows were lit, not brightly. A dim, yellowish light, like a fluorescent tube on its last legs, flickering from inside. I stood in the dark and watched it for a while. Paige came out behind me and said, "Is that place open?" I said I didn't think so. I said I hadn't seen any cars. She squinted at it and said it was probably a motion sensor or a timer or something they'd left on years ago. That seemed reasonable. It seemed almost boring even. We went back inside. I woke up at, I think it was around 2 in the morning, maybe 2:30. The house was quiet. Paige was asleep in the next room and I could hear her breathing. I went to the kitchen for water and I looked out the window toward the road. The gas station was dark now. All the lights were off. But there was a woman standing in the middle of the road between the station and the house. She was facing the house. She wasn't moving. She was wearing something pale, a dress or a shirt, I couldn't tell, and her hair was down. She was just standing there in the dark, on the gravel road, not moving at all. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her, and I could feel my heart doing something particular in my chest, something deliberate and loud. And I told myself it was a neighbor out for a late walk, that people did that out here, but I kept looking for the sound of footsteps or the beam of a phone light or anything normal. And then she did something that I still can't explain to myself in any way that helps. She crouched down very slowly and pressed both of her hands flat against the gravel road. And then she pressed her face down too. And she stayed there like that, forehead against the road, hands flat, completely still, like she was listening to something underneath it. I went and got Paige and made her look. She took one look out the window and said very quietly, "Oh, that's not good." The woman was gone by the time Paige found her glasses. The road was empty. We left at first light. We didn't go near the gas station. I've been trying to find someone to handle the estate sale remotely ever since. The part I come back to, when we carried our bags to the car in the morning, there were 2 parallel lines pressed into the gravel of the turnaround, about shoulder width apart, running all the way from the road to within about 3 feet of where my car was parked. They looked like drag marks. But the thing is, they pointed away from the road toward the car, not toward the road from the car. Whatever made them had been heading toward us. Story 3. I took a job driving long-haul freight one summer after I left the military. I know that sounds like I'm setting something up, but honestly it was just because the pay was decent and I needed the alone time that comes with 18 hours of highway. My name's Teodoro Vasquez, most people call me Tio, and I was 26, fresh out of 4 years of something I was still processing, and I'd convinced myself that movement was the same as direction. I drove a lot of night routes that summer. I actually preferred them. It was a run out of Memphis heading toward Little Rock mid-July. Hot in that way that doesn't let up after dark, where the air feels thick with something more than heat. I had a haul of restaurant equipment, flat, boring cargo, and I was about an hour west of Memphis on 40 when I saw the off-ramp sign for a truck rest area. My logbook said I didn't technically need to stop, but I was hungry and I'd been clenching my jaw for about 50 miles, which is a thing I do when I'm tired without admitting it to myself. The rest area had a Shell station attached to it, except the Shell sign was dark, and the lot was empty of everything except one semi that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Weeds had come up through the asphalt around the tires. The station's glass doors were covered with brown paper on the inside, which is what they do when a place is permanently closed. A sign on the door said something about the facilities, but I didn't read the whole thing. There were still 2 functional bathrooms in the rest area section and a vending machine that took my dollar and gave me a bag of chips without complaint. I sat at a picnic table for maybe 15 minutes. The ambient light from the highway was enough to see by, and I could hear the trucks going by on the overpass. A moth was doing circles around the one working light above the vending machine. Normal, the kind of normal that almost makes you sleepy. I was walking back to my cab when I heard it, talking, coming from inside the closed station, muffled like a radio left on but irregular. It rose and fell the way a conversation does, 2 voices maybe, though I couldn't make out words. I stood there and listened. I told myself there were people living in there, squatters, which was possible. I told myself it was sound bleeding over from somewhere, the highway, a car somewhere in the dark. I tried hard to make it fit into something ordinary. I walked closer to the station. The glass doors were covered with the brown paper, but the paper on one of them had a tear near the bottom corner, about an inch wide. I crouched down and looked through it. There was someone sitting at the checkout counter. Sitting behind it, actually, in the spot where a cashier would have been, in a low chair I couldn't really see. What I could see was the arm resting on the counter, the hand flat on the dusty surface. The arm was bare and pale. And the hand, I need to be precise about this because it's the thing that made me stand up fast. The hand was facing the wrong way. The palm was down, which is normal, but the elbow was bent toward me across the top of the counter, which meant the arm was twisted backward to a degree that no arm does. The hand was oriented correctly to the counter. The arm it was attached to was not. I stood up and took 3 large steps back toward my truck. The talking stopped, not gradually, all at once, mid-murmur, like a switch. And then one of the covered glass doors moved. Not opened, moved, like something pressed against the paper from inside and leaned. The paper bulged outward in the shape of a face. Not just a vague pressure, a face, the bridge of a nose, the indentations of closed eyes, the line of a mouth. It pressed outward slowly and held there, paper stretched tight over the features beneath it. I was in my cab and the engine was running before I finished having that thought. I didn't check my mirrors for the first mile. I logged an extra stop on my sheet that night. I wrote, mechanical issue, rest stop, 40W. I don't know why I felt like I needed to write anything at all. Maybe I just needed to mark that something happened. The thing I found when I was checking my cargo at the next stop, a single handprint in the dust on the outside of my trailer door, small, oriented correctly, perfectly placed, centered just above the door latch. I hadn't made it. I know this because the dust on that door had been undisturbed when I checked it leaving Memphis, and there'd been no stop between. I thought about wiping it off. I didn't for a while. I kept checking on it. It disappeared between Little Rock and Texarkana. I don't know when. Story 4. I grew up in a small town in northern Idaho that sits in a valley so narrow you can lose 2 hours of daylight just from the ridge shadows. The kind of place where everyone's related to someone who worked the old mines and where the general store has been owned by the same family since 1934. My family had been there for 3 generations. And the particular fact I need you to understand is that the old Harlow Road, which ran out past the closed-up gas station on the edge of town, was the kind of road where children were told, without irony, not to walk after dark. Nobody ever explained that rule very well. My mother would just say that the road wasn't good after dark and change the subject. My father, who was not a superstitious man by any measure, once said that some places had a mood to them and left it at that. The gas station had closed in the mid-90s. Before that, it had apparently been running since the 40s, and there were old-timers who remembered it as a working place, the kind where you knew the owner and he knew your car. After it closed, it just sat. The pumps were still there. The building was still there. I used to ride my bike past it sometimes on summer days and never felt much except that the windows were dark and the sign was old. I was 17 the fall that Sarah Lindstrom moved to town. She was from the Pacific Northwest originally, and she had that particular quality some outsiders have of not respecting local rules because they'd never been given the context for them. I don't say that critically. I liked Sarah. We'd become friends by late October, the kind of fast friends you make when you're 17 and have nothing to do after school. She was curious about everything in a way that had no fear in it, which I found exciting then and terrifying now in retrospect. She asked about the old gas station. I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. She asked if I'd ever been inside. I said no. She said we should go. I want to be honest, I wasn't scared of the place exactly. I was more uncomfortable in the way you're uncomfortable when something violates a rule you've internalized without understanding. But Sarah had that thing where her certainty was contagious, and so on a Thursday afternoon in November, the sky was that particular November white that's not quite overcast, just pale and distant. We walked out Harlow Road. The station was small. One story, a single-bay garage attached to the main building, the garage door permanently halfway down. The pumps were old enough to have the spinning number dials instead of digital readouts. A rusted coffee can sat on top of one of the pumps, which I remember because it struck me as odd, not threatening, just oddly deliberate, like someone had set it there on purpose recently. The main door was unlocked. That was either comforting or the opposite, and I told myself it was comforting. Inside, it was exactly what you'd expect. A counter, empty shelves, old merchandise hooks, a floor that hadn't been swept since the 90s. A clock on the wall that said 4:17, which was coincidentally close to the actual time, though I couldn't know if it was right or just coincidentally close or slowly dying. A wire rack by the door still held a few sun-faded automotive brochures. Sarah immediately started looking at everything like it was a museum, and I stood near the door. I was looking at a shelf near the back. There was a coffee mug on it with something in it, and I was trying to tell if it was old coffee or just dust when I heard the garage sound from under the half-raised door. Rhythmic, soft, like breathing almost, except too slow. In and out, with a pause between them that was maybe 2 seconds too long to be comfortable. I stood still and listened. Sarah had gone around the counter and was reading something on a laminated card on the wall and hadn't noticed. I told myself it was the wind coming under the door. It was partly. There was wind outside, but the sound had a quality that was too even, too measured. Wind doesn't keep time. I said, "Sarah, we should go." She looked at me and then looked toward the garage, and then her expression changed into the one where she was trying to decide if I was being dramatic. She opened her mouth to say something. The garage door began to move, not dramatically, not slamming upward, just inching up slowly with a grinding sound, the way a manual door moves when someone on the inside is lifting it by hand. We left. I want to say we walked calmly, and I want to say we ran, and neither is quite right. We left very quickly, without talking, and we didn't look back. I can tell you that I had a very clear animal certainty, the kind that bypasses thought entirely, that we needed to be off that property before whatever was in the garage fully raised that door. We made it to the road. I don't know how far we'd walked before Sarah said, very quietly, "I heard it breathing." I said I had too. The coffee can was missing from the pump when we passed it on the way out. I went back 2 years later in daylight in my car and parked on the road and just looked at the place. The garage door was down all the way, fully shut. I don't know what that means. What I know is that when I looked at the ground in front of the garage door, there were 3 long parallel scrapes in the concrete pad, running from inside the garage outward, like something had dragged its weight across it trying to get out. I told my mother about it when I was back home for Christmas. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told you Harlow Road wasn't good after dark." I pointed out that we'd been there in the afternoon. She said, "Yes, you were." She didn't explain what she meant. I didn't ask. Story 5. It took me a long time to tell this to anyone who wasn't already there with me that night, and even Marcus, who was there, who saw the same things I saw, doesn't like to talk about it. I'll tell you what happened and what we found afterward, and what I think about it now, which is not very much. I don't think thinking about it helps. My name is Kenji Nakamura. I was 23, finishing a geology degree, and Marcus Oyelaren was my roommate and oldest friend. We'd grown up in the same neighborhood in Phoenix, and we were the kind of friends where the friendship required no maintenance. We could go 2 months without talking and pick up mid-sentence. That fall, we decided to take a road trip up through Utah and into Wyoming, partly because we could, partly because Marcus had never seen real mountains. We had a cooler, a shared playlist we were constantly arguing about, and no real itinerary. We got a late start from Salt Lake, which meant we were driving through Nevada desert in the early evening rather than the afternoon. The light was doing something extraordinary, that horizontal amber light that makes everything in the desert look like it's lit from inside, and we were taking pictures out the window and talking about nothing important. Marcus was working through a bag of beef jerky. My coffee from 3 hours ago had gone cold in the cup holder. I was in a good mood. I want to be clear about that because of what comes after. The car started having problems around 7. A stuttering thing, not quite a misfire. The engine would run fine and then hesitate, run fine and hesitate like it was thinking. Marcus is better with cars than I am, and he said it was probably a fuel filter and probably not immediately serious, but probably we shouldn't push it. We agreed we'd stop at the next town or station and look things over. The next thing we found wasn't a town. It was a gas station sitting just off the highway, a 2-pump operation, the kind that had once also been a small diner or lunch counter, with a wide awning over a concrete pad and a sign that had the word "stop" on it in large letters, which felt slightly on the nose. The lights under the awning were still on, or most of them, though one panel in the corner was dark, and the humming from the fluorescents was audible from 20 feet away. It was closed. A metal chain with a closed sign ran across the driveway, low to the ground, but the lights being on made us both slow down and look at it before driving on. We pulled half off the road, and Marcus got out to see if he could get a look at the engine in the awning light without having to deal with the chain. I stayed in the car and watched him walk to the edge of the property. That's when I noticed the person in the diner section. Through the big plate window, dark inside, but the awning light reflected off it enough that the interior wasn't totally black. I could see a booth. One of those old fixed-seat diner booths with the bench seats. There was someone sitting in it, sitting in the booth, across from an empty seat, very still, like they were waiting for something. I watched them for a while without doing anything, which I know sounds passive, but there was a quality to the stillness that made me not want to do anything that would change it. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape, a person shape, sitting at a booth in a dark, closed diner. Marcus came back to the car and said something about a loose connection, and I said quietly, "Don't look at the window yet, but there's someone in that diner." He looked at the window immediately. Of course. He looked for a long time. He said, "Huh." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is it? Are they facing us?" I hadn't been sure. Looking at it again, I was fairly sure they were facing us, yes. The figure in the booth was oriented toward the window, looking out at the car. We tried to be rational about it. Homeless person sheltering, we said. Someone waiting out the heat who broke in. Nothing dangerous, we said, just someone camping out in an abandoned diner, which happens. And then the figure in the booth stood up in a way where it kept going, not a tall person, but the motion continued. The head still rising after the body had fully straightened, going up past where a standing person's head should be. Hands flat on the table, neck elongating in a way that I couldn't make fully fit into the picture I was looking at, until the face was pressed against the glass of the window looking out at us. I've been trying to describe that face since it happened, and the best I can do is this. There wasn't one. Not in the way faces work. There was a pale oval pressed to the glass, with the pressure marks you'd expect, the smear of contact, but the features were wrong in distribution. The mouth was where a forehead should be, the rest was smooth. That was the worst part, that there was a mouth and it was in the wrong place and it was open, and that's all there was. Marcus got back in the car and I was already in gear. We drove about 12 miles before either of us said anything. The car ran fine the rest of the trip. We never did figure out what was wrong with it. I know what Marcus found when he was scrolling back through his phone photos the next morning, looking at the Utah landscape pictures. I know because he showed me and then deleted it without asking me, which I think was the right call. In the background of one of the pictures he'd taken through the car window, the wide amber-light desert shot, which was a genuinely beautiful photo. In the far right edge of the frame, there was a structure just visible at the edge of the highway, a small building with an awning. We'd taken that picture about 40 minutes before we stopped. In the awning light of that building, almost too small to see, there was a figure standing at the edge of the road. We hadn't stopped there. We hadn't been anywhere near that point in the road when we stopped. I've zoomed in on that photo in my memory more times than I can count. The figure was too far from the lens to show much detail, but the mouth was the right height. Thanks so much for watching. If these stories kept you up a little, honestly, that means I did my job. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more, and I'd love to know in the comments which one got under your skin. The gas station one, the diner. Tell me I'm not alone in never wanting to stop for fuel after dark again. Share this with someone who thinks they don't scare easily. Until next time, keep your tank full and stay on the main roads.